She laughed at his fire until it burned brighter than her forge. The heat hit him first, a dry, oppressive force that pressed in from all sides, thick with the scent of superheated rock and ionized minerals. It was a physical presence, something to be shouldered and endured. Colson stood on the obsidian glass observation platform, the soles of his heavy-duty environmental boots insulating him from the radiating floor. Below him, the great forge of Xylos fell away into a vast, tiered caldera, a wound in the planet's crust that bled light and power. Vents of azure and tangerine flame roared in controlled, rhythmic pulses, illuminating the chiseled, industrial grandeur of the place. It was a cathedral built to honor a star held captive in the planet's core. His suit's internal systems worked overtime to keep him from cooking, but a sheen of sweat still coated his brow beneath the helmet's seal. When he retracted the faceplate, the air was surprisingly breathable, though it tasted of metal. He unsealed his collar, the cool, recycled air of his suit ghosting over his skin. He was a man built for harsh frontiers, solid and broad-shouldered, with a thick, dark beard that was neatly trimmed but still rugged. His most striking feature, however, was his eyes. They held a soft, internal luminescence, a steady, molten gold that was not a trick of the light. It was the visible manifestation of his neural interface, a constant stream of environmental and biometric data projected directly onto his optic nerves. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, emerging from the shimmering heat haze near the caldera's edge. Brixta, the Forge-Mistress. She was even more formidable in person. Taller than him by a hand, her body was a study in lean, powerful lines, showcased by the dark, minimalist armor that seemed fused to her form. Her dark hair was swept back from a face of sharp, aristocratic angles and pale, pearlescent skin that seemed to capture and refract the forge's glow. Long, elegant ears, tapering to delicate points, rose from her hairline, and her eyes, like his, burned with that same molten gold. In her, though, it felt not like technology, but like a fundamental part of her being. "The human geologist," she said. Her voice was a low, resonant contralto, each word shaped with precision. There was no welcome in it. "Terraformer," Colson corrected, his tone even. "Colson." He gave a slight, formal nod. Her gaze swept over him, from his heavy suit to the array of sensor equipment being offloaded from his skiff by automated drones. A flicker of something, amusement, disdain, crossed her features. "Your machines make a great deal of noise," she stated, not as an observation, but an accusation. He watched one of his drones, a silver sphere no bigger than his fist, detach from the main pallet and hum quietly into the air, its multi-spectrum lens beginning a passive scan of the cavern. Brixta's eyes followed it, her lip curling slightly. Then she laughed. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a low, throaty cascade of pure condescension, a sound that echoed the cracking of cooling stone. It was a dismissal made audible. "You come to our world, to the very heart of its power, and you bring these toys," she said, her gesture encompassing his entire operation. "You think you can understand the song of the world by listening to the hum of a box?" Colson remained silent, letting his drone continue its work. His golden eyes, steady and analytical, met hers. She turned from him, walking to the precipice overlooking the largest magma channel. The air around her seemed to warp with the intensity of the heat, but she appeared completely unaffected. "We do not need machines to listen," she said, her voice rising to be heard over the forge's roar. "We feel the pulse of the mantle in our bones. We hear the planet's heart. It speaks to us in a language of fire and pressure. What you seek with your instruments, we know as intimately as our own breath." She raised a hand. Below, a river of incandescent rock flowed sluggishly. As she crooked a single finger, a tendril of the molten substance, thick as her arm, lifted from the flow. It rose into the air, defying gravity, twisting and cooling into a complex, razor-sharp crystalline spire that hovered before her. She gave it a final, commanding look before letting it drop back into the channel, dissolving without a splash. She turned back to him, her expression smug and unassailable. Just as she opened her mouth to deliver another pronouncement, a small device on Colson's belt emitted a soft, almost inaudible chirp. In his vision, a seismic waveform bloomed, a jagged line of red against a grid of calm blue. It was deep, powerful, and unlike any of the surface vibrations, a deep mantle tremor. He focused on the data, the golden light in his eyes intensifying for a fraction of a second as he cross-referenced the reading with his initial orbital scans. Brixta hadn't noticed. She stood with her chin high, lost in her own perceived triumph, completely oblivious to the faint, ominous shudder that had just passed through the world's very core. The following days settled into a tense routine. Colson worked with a quiet, methodical focus that Brixta found both irritating and strangely compelling. He and his drones moved about the Great Forge, planting deep resonance sensors, taking atmospheric samples, and mapping the intricate network of lava tubes with ground-penetrating sonar. He moved like a man who respected danger, not one who feared it. Every step was deliberate, every action economical. He never wasted emotion. She turned from him, walking to the precipice overlooking the largest magma channel. The air around her seemed to warp with the intensity of the heat, but she appeared completely unaffected. "We do not need machines to listen," she said, her voice rising to be heard over the forge's roar. "We feel the pulse of the mantle in our bones. We hear the planet's heart. It speaks to us in a language of fire and pressure. What you seek with your instruments, we know as intimately as our own breath." She raised a hand. Below, a river of incandescent rock flowed sluggishly. As she crooked a single finger, a tendril of the molten substance, thick as her arm, lifted from the flow. It rose into the air, defying gravity, twisting and cooling into a complex, razor-sharp crystalline spire that hovered before her. She gave it a final, commanding look before letting it drop back into the channel, dissolving without a splash. She turned back to him, her expression smug and unassailable. Just as she opened her mouth to deliver another pronouncement, a small device on Colson's belt emitted a soft, almost inaudible chirp. In his vision, a seismic waveform bloomed, a jagged line of red against a grid of calm blue. It was deep, powerful, and unlike any of the surface vibrations, a deep mantle tremor. He focused on the data, the golden light in his eyes intensifying for a fraction of a second as he cross-referenced the reading with his initial orbital scans. Brixta hadn't noticed. She stood with her chin high, lost in her own perceived triumph, completely oblivious to the faint, ominous shudder that had just passed through the world's very core. The following days settled into a tense routine. Colson worked with a quiet, methodical focus that Brixta found both irritating and strangely compelling. He and his drones moved about the Great Forge, planting deep resonance sensors, taking atmospheric samples, and mapping the intricate network of lava tubes with ground-penetrating sonar. He moved like a man who respected danger, not one who feared it. Brixta watched him from the upper tiers of the forge, a silent, statuesque observer. She was meant to be his chaperone, a duty she considered beneath her, but she could not deny the flicker of curiosity he ignited. She saw the way his golden eyes would brighten as data streamed in, the intense concentration on his face as he analyzed a geological survey on his wrist-mounted projector. He was utterly absorbed by his work, his fire a cold, intellectual thing she could not comprehend. It was nothing like the passionate, roaring fire of her forge. "The lithospheric composition is far more brittle than your records indicate," he said one afternoon, approaching her where she oversaw her apprentices. He did not raise his voice, yet it cut through the din of the forge. He held up a holographic display showing a cross-section of the planet's crust riddled with fissures she had never seen. "Our records are histories, not speculations." she replied coolly, not bothering to look at his projection. "They are based on millennia of communion with this world." "Communion is one thing," Colson said, his tone unwavering. "Material stress tolerance is another." An apprentice, a young Xylosian with more curiosity than sense, peered at the hologram with wide eyes. Brixta shot the boy a withering glare that sent him scurrying back to his workstation. She needed to guide Colson to the outer caldera rim to place a final, long-range sensor. It was a task she had been postponing, but his persistence was becoming an annoyance she wished to conclude. The path was treacherous, a narrow bridge of cooled lava rock that spanned a chasm of churning, molten earth. The air was thick with sulfurous gases, and the bridge itself was prone to shedding shards of rock into the fiery depths. She expected him to hesitate, to rely on one of his noisy machines to carry the sensor across. She would use his caution to mock him again. She led the way, her movements sure-footed and confident. She was born of this heat and danger. She reached the midway point and turned, a condescending remark already forming on her lips. But Colson was right behind her. He moved with a low center of gravity, his balance absolute. He did not look down. His gaze was fixed on the far side, his focus total. He carried the heavy sensor pack as if it weighed nothing. A sudden tremor, stronger than the usual thrum of the forge, shook the bridge. Brixta instinctively braced herself, her people's grace allowing her to ride the motion. Colson, however, barely seemed to notice the jolt, his stride unbroken. He drew level with her on the narrow span. For a moment, they were shoulder to shoulder, the heat from the chasm rising up between them. His physical presence was undeniable, solid, stable, a point of certainty in this volatile place. Her skin, even through her armor, tingled with an unexpected awareness of his proximity. His suit was radiating a cool field, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat she lived in. "The tremors are growing more frequent," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "The forge is active today," she countered, her own voice tighter than she liked. "It sings a powerful song." "That's not a song," he replied, his golden eyes meeting hers. They were inches apart. They were inches apart. He then moved past her, continuing to the other side as if they had been discussing the weather, leaving her standing alone on the bridge with a strange, unwelcome heat coiling in her belly that had nothing to do with the lava below. The flare-up came without warning. One moment, Brixta was demonstrating a delicate shaping technique to her apprentices, drawing a ribbon of glowing metal from a secondary vent. The next, the vent gave a guttural roar and spat a plume of superheated steam and incandescent particles. Her apprentices scrabbled back, but Brixta, caught mid-motion, was not fast enough. She threw her left arm up to shield her face, the searing vapor washing over her exposed forearm. The pain was sharp and immediate, a deep, consuming fire. Her obsidian-like skin, normally resistant to high temperatures, bubbled and split. She bit back a cry, her pride refusing to show weakness, but she stumbled back, cradling the injury. Her attendants rushed forward, their faces etched with panic, offering useless platitudes and traditional salves that would do little for a burn of this severity. Through the haze of pain, she saw a solid form moving with purpose. Colson. He cut through the small crowd, his expression grim and focused. In one hand, he held a flat, metallic device, and in the other, a sealed tube. "Stand back," he commanded. His voice held an authority that no one, not even Brixta, thought to question. He knelt beside her, his movement swift and sure. "Let me see it," he said, his voice softer now. She hesitated, her instinct to refuse help from this off-worlder warring with the agony in her arm, but the steady confidence in his golden eyes silenced her protest. She slowly extended her arm. The sight of the injury was gruesome. The pearlescent skin was blackened and blistered, the crimson bioluminescent patterns beneath it flickering erratically like damaged circuits. He brought the metallic device, a cryocompress, close to the wound. An intense, localized cold radiated from it.
instantly leaching the fire from her flesh. A shudder of relief went through her. "This will neutralize the thermal damage," he explained, his voice a low murmur. "Now hold still." He unsealed the tube and squeezed a thick, translucent gel onto his gloved fingers. He then began to apply it to her burn. His touch was incredibly gentle, stark contrast to his rugged appearance. It was methodical, professional, yet deeply personal. As he spread the cool,
bio-regenerative gel over her damaged skin, she watched his face. The golden light of his eyes was softer, his focus entirely on her. She could feel the advanced nanites in the gel beginning their work, the stinging pain receding into a dull, manageable ache. The moment stretched. The roar of the forge faded into a distant hum. All she was aware of was his presence, his careful touch on her skin, the strange intimacy of this clinical act. He was so close she could feel the faint coolness radiating from his suit, could smell the clean, sterile scent of the medical supplies mixed with the faint human scent of him. Her own people had panicked. He had acted. He had brought a quiet, effective order to the chaos. Beneath her anger and pride, a new, unsettling feeling took root, a grudging respect, and something more, something warmer and more dangerous that tightened her chest. When he finished, he wrapped her arm in a light, sterile bandage. He worked in silence, his expression unreadable. "It will be fully healed in a few hours," he said, finally meeting her gaze. His golden eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't name. "You were lucky. Another second and it would have hit your face." She pulled her arm back slowly, flexing her fingers. The pain was almost gone. The skin beneath the bandage was already beginning to mend. "My luck had nothing to do with it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at his strong, capable hands, then back to his face. The condescension she had felt for him seemed like a distant memory, a foolish vanity from another lifetime. She had laughed at his tools, at his science, and he had just used them to unmake her pain with a gentle touch. Colson found her in her private solar, a chamber carved into the rock high above the main forge floor. It was the only place in the caldera with a view of the sky, a ceiling of reinforced transparasteel showing the deep indigo of the Zolotian evening. She was standing with her back to the entrance, her bandaged arm held stiffly at her side, staring up at the unfamiliar constellations. The data from his final sensor was in, and the picture it painted was complete. It was worse than he had imagined. He cleared his throat softly. She turned, her movements still possessing their inherent grace, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. The crimson patterns on her skin flowed in slow, troubled currents. "The arm?" he asked. "It is functional," she replied, a clipped, formal response. "Your medicine is effective." "Good." He did not waste any more time on pleasantries. "We need to talk. I've finished my analysis." He activated his wrist projector, and a three-dimensional model of Xylos materialized in the air between them. It was a cutaway view, showing the crust, the mantle, and the core. A massive, pulsing anomaly of angry red and orange festered deep within the mantle, directly beneath the continent on which they stood. Thin red lines, representing his seismic data, fed into it from all directions. "This is what I've been tracking," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's a mantle plume, a massive upwelling of superheated rock from the core mantle boundary. The pressure is increasing exponentially." Brixta stared at the hologram, her golden eyes wide. She could not deny the image, but her mind recoiled from its implications. "The planet is often active," she argued, her voice lacking its usual conviction. "These are the moods I spoke of. It will settle." "No," Colson said, his tone flat and absolute. He manipulated the image, running a temporal projection. The red mass swelled, its pressure readings climbing into critical levels. "This isn't a mood. This is a terminal diagnosis. The lithosphere directly beneath us is fracturing under the strain. All the signs are there. The increased tremors, the unpredictable vent activity, the gas compositions. Your forge isn't singing, it's screaming." He zoomed the projection in on the area of the Great Forge,
A catastrophic failure cascade bloomed across the simulation, the entire caldera collapsing inward, followed by an eruption that vaporized the model of the capital city. Based on the current rate of pressure increase, this will happen in less than 3 standard rotations, he stated. It will be an extinction-level event. Her face was pale, the pearlescent quality of her skin looking ashen in the holographic light. Her entire culture, her religion, her identity was built upon the belief that they were the masters of this planetary power, its favored children. What he was showing her was not just a disaster, it was blasphemy. It was a declaration that their gods were false, and their faith was a lie. "It is not possible," she whispered, shaking her head. "Our seers would have felt it. The elders would have known. Did they feel the tremor the day I arrived? Did they predict the flare that burned you?" he asked, his voice devoid of accusation, filled only with irrefutable logic. He stepped closer, his own burning eyes locked on hers. He pointed a finger at the white bandage on her arm, a stark mark against her dark armor.
"Some things," he said quietly, his voice a gravelly assertion that broke through her denial, "are not metaphors." The truth of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The burn on her arm was real, the data pulsing in the air was real, and the terror coiling in her gut was very, very real. Her fire, the fire she commanded, was about to be consumed by a much larger and more indifferent flame. And the only person who had seen it coming was the man she had mocked. Clutching Colson's data projector as if it were a sacred text, Brixta stormed the chamber of the Xylosian Council. The elders, led by the High Elder, a withered but imposing figure with skin like cracked obsidian, sat on thrones carved from cooled lava rock. They listened with stony expressions as she presented Colson's findings, her voice filled with an urgency they mistook for hysteria. The hologram of their doomed world spun in the center of the chamber, its pulsing red core a silent, damning testament. When she finished, there was a long, heavy silence, broken only by the distant roar of the forge. The High Elder rose slowly, his ancient, glowing eyes fixing her with a look of profound disappointment. "You have been with the off-worlder for less than a week, and already his poison has taken root in your mind," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "You bring us this phantom, this machine ghost, and you expect us to cast aside the wisdom of 10,000 years? It is not a phantom, it is data, measurement," Brixta protested, her voice cracking. "It is an insult," another elder interjected, his jowls quivering with indignation. "He comes here with his trinkets to tell us the world's heart is failing? This is a human lie, a prelude to conquest. He seeks to make us fear our own world, so we will run to him for salvation." The consensus was swift and merciless. They saw Colson's warning not as a gift of knowledge, but as a Trojan horse. They saw her advocacy for it as a betrayal of her culture, her faith, and her title. The High Elder raised a hand, and 2 temple guards approached the center of the chamber. "Brixta," the elder intoned, his voice echoing with grim ceremony, "you have allowed alien thought to cloud your connection to the Forge. You have forgotten the sanctity of the planet's song. You are no longer fit to interpret its voice." He gave a sharp nod. The guards took her arms. They were firm, but not violent. They led her to the ceremonial anvil at the chamber's center. There, with all the elders watching, they methodically unclasped and removed her ceremonial gauntlets, the mark of her office as Forge-Mistress. Each metallic click was like a hammer blow to her spirit. The gauntlets, which had been a part of her since she was an apprentice, were placed on the anvil. Her hands felt bare, weak, and useless. She was stripped not just of her title, but of her very identity. She was escorted from the chamber, a pariah. The heavy stone doors boomed shut behind her, sealing her out from the world she once commanded. She walked through the corridors of the capital, ignoring the stares and whispers of those who had revered her only hours before. Her pride was a heap of cold ash in her chest. Everything she had believed in, the elder's wisdom, the seer's intuition, her own sacred connection, had been proven hollow. There was only one source of truth left. She found Colson at the small temporary camp he had established on the outskirts of the city. He was calibrating a piece of heavy equipment, the Daedalus deep core drill, a monstrous piece of engineering that lay disassembled on the ground. He looked up as she approached, his golden eyes immediately reading the devastation on her face. He didn't need to ask what had happened. She stopped before him, the last vestiges of her arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, terrifying vulnerability. The great and powerful Forge-Mistress was gone. In her place was a woman watching her world die. She looked at the man she had laughed out. The man's quiet competence and unyielding logic were the only things that had proven real in a week of revelations. Her own burning eyes met his, and the words came out in a choked whisper. "Tell me what to do." A new kind of fire was kindled between them in the quiet dark of the Xylosian night, fueled not by passion, but by shared purpose. It was the focused, intense burn of a cutting torch. Colson laid out his plan, a strategy so audacious, so contrary to every Xylosian instinct that Brixta could only stare at him in stunned silence. He didn't intend to stop the eruption. That, he explained, was like trying to capsize a warship by blowing on its sails. The forces involved were too immense. "We don't stop it," he said, pointing to a spot on the holographic map, a desolate mountain range 50 miles from the capital. "We give it a new way out. We drill a relief vent. We create a new controlled volcano, releasing the pressure before it builds to a catastrophic level under the city." The sheer scale of it was staggering. To wound the planet in order to save it? It was a human solution, pragmatic, violent, and utterly logical. He walked her through the mechanics of the Daedalus drill, explaining how its mole plasma bits and gravitic stabilizers could bore through miles of solid rock in a matter of hours. He spoke of resonance frequencies, magma chamber dynamics, and lithospheric stress vectors. She did not understand all the words, but she understood the meaning behind them. This was his art, his forge. His fire was the relentless power of knowledge. They worked together to reassemble the drill, a complex and demanding task. He would explain a component's function, and she, with her innate understanding of materials and structural integrity, would see a faster, more stable way to connect it. Her hands, no longer adorned with the gauntlets of a priestess, proved just as adept with a plasma wrench. The physical labor was a balm, a way to channel their fear and anxiety into productive action. As they worked, they talked. The barriers between them had crumbled, leaving a landscape of shared vulnerability. He told her about his childhood on a terraforming colony, how he learned to read the life and death of a world in its rocks and winds. He spoke of the quiet satisfaction of bringing a dead world to life, the profound connection he felt to the grand, impersonal systems of the universe. He was not the soulless machine minder she had assumed. He loved worlds as much as she did, just in a different language. She, in turn, told him what it felt like to be a Forge-Mistress. She described the feeling of the planet's pulse through the soles of her feet, the way she could hear the song of cooling metal, the immense pride of creating something beautiful and enduring from the raw, chaotic power of the forge. She confessed her fear, not just of dying, but of her entire culture being proven wrong, of their faith being nothing but a beautiful myth. Later, exhausted, they took a break, resting near a natural heat vent that steamed in the cool night air. The city below was a basin of flickering lights, oblivious to its impending doom. "I was wrong about you," she said, her voice soft. She looked at his face, illuminated by the glow of a nearby work light and the soft fire in his eyes. "I saw your technology as a crutch, a weakness, but it is a part of you, a way for you to touch the world."
It's just a tool, Colson replied, his gaze on the distant mountains. The will to use it, the knowledge of how, that's the important part. She reached out, her fingers hesitating for a moment before they brushed against the back of his hand. His skin was warm, solid. It was a simple, tentative gesture, but it carried the weight of everything that had passed between them. It was an admission of trust, of respect. It was the beginning of an alliance that ran deeper than mere survival. In the shadow of the apocalypse, they had found each other. The world began to die on the third rotation. It started not with a bang, but with a low, gut-wrenching groan from the bedrock beneath the Capitol. The ground swayed, a sickening, liquid motion that sent cracks racing across plazas and shattered the obsidian glass windows of the High Council's chambers. Panic, a contagion faster than any plague, erupted in the streets. Xylosians, who had lived their entire lives in harmony with their volatile world, were now its prey. From the great forge, a vast, roiling cloud of black ash billowed into the sky, blotting out the sun and casting a grim twilight over the city. The elders' rituals had failed. Their chants were lost in the rising din of the planet's agony. The seers were catatonic, their minds overwhelmed by a psychic scream of geological pain they could not process. "We have to go now," Colson said, his voice tight with urgency. He and Brixta loaded the last component of the Daedalus drill onto his heavy cargo skiff. The air was thick with ash, forcing them to wear respirators. Colson had his helmet sealed, the golden glow of his eyes the only steady light in the swirling gloom. He piloted the skiff, listing it off the ground with a powerful hum of anti-grav engines. Brixta stood beside him in the cockpit, her hand gripping a support bar as the vehicle bucked. She was his navigator, her intimate knowledge of the surrounding Badlands their only hope of reaching the target monolith in time. "Veer west," she shouted over the engine's whine. "There is a canyon pass. It should be more stable than the open plain." Colson banked the skiff sharply, following her direction. The journey was a flight through hell. The landscape below was tearing itself apart. Fissures, hundreds of feet deep, opened in their path, venting noxious gases that sent the skiff's sensors screaming. Rock slides cascaded down the canyon walls, and Colson had to push the skiff's maneuverability to its absolute limit, executing stomach-turning dodges to avoid being crushed by house-sized boulders. Brixta was a rock. Her fear was a palpable thing, but she suppressed it, her focus absolute. She pointed out unstable overhangs, ancient lava tubes that might collapse, and patches of ground that had turned to liquid scree. She was reading the terrain with the same instinct she used to read her forge, seeing its weaknesses and strengths. She was no longer just a priestess. She was a survivor, her skills honed by her world now being used to defy it. At one point, a massive tremor threw the skiff sideways, slamming it against the canyon wall with a horrendous screech of metal. Warning lights flashed across Colson's console. The port stabilizer was failing. "I can't hold it steady for long," he grunted, fighting the controls. "There," Brixta yelled, pointing ahead, "through that arch. It leads to the high plateau. The rock is older there, more solid." Colson poured every ounce of power into the engines. The skiff groaned in protest, a wounded beast dragging itself to safety. He scraped through the natural rock arch with inches to spare, the vehicle shuddering violently before it finally settled on the relatively stable ground of the plateau. They had made it. Before them, shrouded in the falling ash, stood the target, a single colossal granite monolith, the pin Colson intended to stick in the planet's heart. They looked at each other, breathing heavily. Their faces were smudged with grime, their bodies bruised. But in that shared look of grim determination, they were more unified than ever. The first phase was over. The truly desperate part was about to begin. The base of the granite monolith offered a terrifying vantage point. They could see the glow of the capital city on the horizon, flickering like a dying ember against the ash-choked sky. The ground beneath their feet was in constant motion, a low-frequency vibration that resonated deep in their bones. They worked with a desperate, frantic efficiency, deploying the Daedalus drill and anchoring it to the monolith.
Every tremor threatened to topple the massive device. Every roar from the planet's depths was a reminder that they were living on borrowed seconds. "Power core is online," Colson yelled over the noise. "Main bit is aligned. We're ready to start the sequence." He stood at the control console, his gloved hands flying over the holographic interface. Brixta stood near the drill head itself, her boots planted wide against the shaking ground. "Engaging plasma cutters," Colson announced. A blindingly bright, white-hot beam erupted from the tip of the drill, striking the granite with a deafening sizzle. The drill began its slow, inexorable descent into the planet's crust. On the console, Colson monitored its progress. For the first few hundred meters, everything was stable. Then, the telemetry began to flicker. "Damn it," he swore, his knuckles white on the edge of the console. "The seismic interference is too strong. The deep-level sensors are going blind. I can't see what's ahead." To continue drilling without guidance was suicide. They could hit an unstable magma pocket, causing the drill to vaporize, or trigger a localized eruption that would kill them instantly. The entire plan teetered on the brink of failure. "Keep drilling," Brixta said, her voice cutting through his rising frustration. He looked up. She was walking toward the drill, her expression one of intense concentration. She reached the main housing of the machine, the massive cylinder that vibrated with unimaginable power, and placed both of her palms flat against its metallic surface. She closed her eyes. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "What I have always done," she whispered, her voice seeming to come from far away. "I am listening." She stood perfectly still, a conduit between his machine and her world. The crimson patterns on her skin began to glow, pulsing in time with the deep, rhythmic tremors of the planet. She was tapping into her forge sense, that innate, mystical connection she had always spoken of. But this time, she was not listening for a song. She was reading a blueprint of destruction. "Angle the descent," she said suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. 3 degrees to port. There is a fault line 200 meters down. You must bypass it to the west." Colson stared at her, then at his blank sensor screen. He had no other choice. He had to trust her. He adjusted the drill's angle. "Hold," she commanded a minute later. "You are approaching a magma channel. It is under extreme pressure. You need to increase power and push through it quickly." "Increasing power could overload the plasma emitters," he countered. "Do it," she ordered, her body trembling with the effort. "The channel is thinning. You have a window of 50 meters, now." He gritted his teeth and slammed the power controls to maximum. The drill screamed, a high-pitched shriek of tortured metal, but it surged forward. On the console, temperature alarms blared red. For a terrifying moment, he thought the machine would tear itself apart. And then the reading stabilized. They were through. He looked at Brixta in utter amazement. She stood with her hands pressed to the machine, her eyes closed, guiding his billion-credit piece of advanced technology with nothing but raw intuition. She was the sensor. She was the guidance system. His cold fire of logic and her hot fire of instinct had merged, becoming a single, unstoppable force directed at the heart of the mountain. They were close. Brixta could feel it. The vibrations coming up through the drill housing had changed, the deep, stony grinding replaced by a muted, fluid roar. They were just above the primary magma chamber, the source of all the pressure. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin glowed with a feverish intensity. The strain of processing the chaotic planetary energies was immense, a psychic onslaught that threatened to shatter her mind. But she held on, anchored by the sound of Colson's steady voice calling out depth readings. "We're at the target depth," he yelled. "The casing is showing signs of thermal fatigue. We have to break through now or pull out." "The rock here is like glass," she gasped, her teeth clenched. "Brittle. One final push is all it needs." "The main emitter is already past its tolerance," he argued, his hands poised over the console. "If I overload it, the whole drill is forfeit. We won't get a second chance." There won't be a second chance for anyone if we fail, she shot back, opening her burning golden eyes to look at him. Trust me, Colson, fire your forge. His gaze locked with hers for a heartbeat. He saw no fear in her, only an absolute, terrifying certainty. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. All right, overloading the core. Get to the skiff. We have 30 seconds. He slammed a shielded control on the panel, and a new, more urgent alarm blared. Brixta did not hesitate. She turned and ran for the skiff, Colson right behind her. They scrambled aboard, and he powered up the engines, lifting the vehicle just as the ground around the monolith began to glow with a deep, cherry-red light. He pushed the skiff back, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the drill. From the cockpit, they watched as the Daedalus drill, their single, desperate gamble, began to melt. Then the monolith itself seemed to swell. Cracks of blinding white light raced across its surface. The low groan of the planet rose to a deafening, world-shattering roar. The monolith exploded. Not in a shower of rock and dust, but in a focused, upward blast of pure energy and matter. A pillar of white-hot plasma and molten earth erupted into the sky, punching through the thick clouds of ash and reaching for the heavens. It was a new mountain, born in an instant of violence and fire. It climbed higher and higher, a terrible, magnificent spear of light that dwarfed anything Brixta had ever witnessed. The sky, which had been dark for days, was lit with a brilliant, hellish orange. The raw power of the display was overwhelming, a primal force that vibrated through the skiff's hull and resonated deep within their souls. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was Colson's fire. The ground shuddered one last time, and then, miraculously, a sense of calm began to settle over the tortured landscape. The violent, erratic shaking eased into a steady, rhythmic pulse as the planet's rage found its new vent. Colson checked his sensors. The seismic activity around the capital was dropping rapidly. The pressure was released. They had done it. He slumped back in his pilot's chair, the adrenaline leaving him feeling hollow and exhausted. He turned to look at Brixta. She was on her feet, her hands pressed against the transparent steel of the cockpit window, her face a mask of profound awe. Ash and grime covered her skin, but her golden eyes were transfixed on the colossal pillar of fire he had unleashed. She slowly turned her head, her gaze moving from the new volcano to him. The look she gave him was stripped of all pride, all arrogance, all condescension. It was a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. She was seeing not just a man, not just a human, but the being who had reached into the heart of her world and commanded it to live. In the days that followed, the new volcano stood as a permanent, glowing monument on the horizon. The Xylosians, awestruck and humbled, named it Colson's Spire. The ash began to settle, revealing a capital city that was damaged but intact. The great forge was quiet, its fires banked, its songs silenced. The elders, their faces masks of shame and disbelief, approached Brixta at the edge of the now quiet city. The high elder bowed, a gesture of submission she had never thought to witness. "We were blind," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "We listened to the echoes of the past and could not hear the truth of the present. The title of Forge-Mistress is yours again, if you will have it." Brixta looked from the humbled elders to the distant, fiery peak of the spire. She had changed. Her world had changed. The old ways were not enough. "I will accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But the role will be different. My forge will no longer be guided by tradition alone. It will be guided by truth, by data and discovery. We will learn the language of science so we may truly understand the song of our world." She would not allow them to make Colson an outcast hero.
She ensured his name was honored, his story told, not as that of an alien savior, but as a partner who brought a new kind of fire to their people. His work was done. His report was filed, and the recommendation for Xylos to join the coalition was submitted with a glowing endorsement of its people's resilience. His skiff was repaired, his equipment packed. He was preparing to leave, standing on a high overlook that offered a final view of the city and the spire he had created. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of violet and rose, and the volcano's soft glow was a steady pulse in the growing twilight. He heard her approach, her footsteps silent on the rock. She came to stand beside him, following her gaze. For a long time, they stood in a comfortable silence, two beings from different worlds bound by a shared, world-altering experience. "You are leaving," she stated. It was not a question. "My survey is complete," he said, his voice quiet. "Will you come back?" He turned to look at her. In the soft light, the sharp angles of her face seemed softer. The golden fire in her eyes was gentle, questioning. "That depends," he said. She stepped closer, closing the small space between them. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with the pull that had grown from friction and respect into something far deeper. She raised a hand, not hesitating this time, and gently touched his bearded cheek. Her fingers were warm against his skin. "When I first saw you, I saw only your machines," she whispered, her gaze intense. "I mocked the fire in your eyes because I thought it was cold and artificial. I was a fool." Her hand moved from his cheek to the center of his chest, resting over his heart. She could feel its steady, powerful beat through the fabric of his shirt. "Your fire was never in your machines, Colson. It was here," she said, her palm pressing gently. "It was in your mind, in your will. I have commanded the heart of a planet my entire life. I have shaped its fire, but it is nothing compared to yours. It burns brighter and hotter than any forge I have ever known." He lifted his own hand, covering hers. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a gesture of profound tenderness. The last light of day faded, leaving them illuminated only by the distant glow of the spire and the fire in their own eyes. She leaned in, her gaze dropping to his lips. He met her halfway. Their first kiss was not a clash of passion, but a quiet, certain joining. It was the taste of ash and survival, of two worlds and two fires merging into one. It was not an ending, it was the forging of a new beginning. 5 years had passed. The air, once thick with the ash of a world's near death, was now clean and crisp. Colson's spire no longer spewed a furious torrent of plasma, but breathed a steady, gentle plume of white steam into the indigo sky, its slopes now home to resilient new flora. It was a scar, but a beautiful one, a permanent reminder of the cataclysm they had averted and the future they had forged. At its base, nestled in a valley carved by ancient lava flows, stood the Xylosian Institute of Planetary Science, a structure of gleaming white alloy and obsidian glass that seemed to have grown from the rock itself. Inside, the main observation chamber was a quiet hive of activity. Young Xylosians, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays, worked with a focused intensity that was a perfect fusion of their heritage and their new reality. They traced seismic waves with their fingertips, analyzed gas compositions from the spire's fumaroles, and cross-referenced the data with their own innate sensitivities to the planet's drum. It was a new kind of communion, one of intellect and intuition intertwined. Brixta stood on an elevated platform, watching them. She was no longer just the Forge-Mistress. She was the Institute's director, and she wore her dual roles with a quiet, unshakable confidence. Her attire was a testament to her journey, a sleek, practical uniform of dark gray, but on her forearms she wore the ceremonial gauntlets of her office, their polished metal gleaming. The fire in her golden eyes was no longer the sharp, arrogant flame of a priestess, but the deep, steady glow of a true leader. A familiar, solid presence settled beside her. Colson slid his arm around her waist, his touch radiating a comfortable warmth that had become the anchor of her life. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his dark beard now flecked with distinguished threads of silver. He had not left. He had stayed, becoming not just her partner, but the chief architect of this new era of Xylosian discovery. "Your former apprentice is surpassing his teachers," Colson murmured, nodding toward the young man who had once scurried from her glare. He was now confidently leading a team, explaining a complex mantle convection model to a group of novices. "He argues with me about mineralogy now. It's infuriating. I love it." Brixta allowed a small, genuine smile to grace her lips. He learned from a stubborn master, both of them. They watched the students for a while longer, a shared parental pride in their hearts. The Institute had become their child, the physical manifestation of their union. Xylos, once fiercely isolationist, was now a respected voice in the Galactic Coalition, its unique blend of intuitive and empirical geology sought after for complex terraforming projects across the quadrant. The Great Forge still operated, but its purpose had been redefined. It was now a laboratory, a place to test materials under extreme conditions, to create alloys for deep space exploration, to innovate rather than merely repeat the rituals of the past. "Come," she said softly, turning and leading him from the platform. "Walk with me." They passed through a set of glass doors onto a wide, private balcony that faced the spire. The evening air was cool, and a breeze whispered down from the volcano's peak. The sky was a tapestry of unfamiliar stars, stars Colson had taught her to name. He pulled her close, his chin resting on the top of her head, and they stood in a comfortable silence watching the steady, faint red glow from the spire's crater paint the underside of its steam cloud. "I received a priority message from the guild this morning," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "They've opened up the Kepler wastes, found a Cocthonian planet with a liquid metallic hydrogen core, unstable, dangerous, a real puzzle. They want me to lead the preliminary survey." Brixta did not stiffen. She did not feel a flicker of fear or insecurity. She simply leaned back into his embrace, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, over his heart. 5 years ago, such a statement would have been a tectonic event, a threat to the fragile world they had just begun to build. Now it was just a conversation. "It sounds like the kind of challenge you used to dream of," she said, her tone calm and even. "A new world to decipher, a new fire to understand." "It is," he admitted. He paused, his gaze fixed on the glowing peak that bore his name. "It's the kind of thing I would have given my right arm for, once." "And what did you tell them?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. He turned her in his arms, his strong hands framing her face. The molten gold of his eyes, the technological fire she had once scorned, now held a depth of love and devotion that was the bedrock of her existence. "I told them that the most fascinating world in the galaxy is the one I'm already standing on," he said, "and that I had no intention of leaving its chief scientist, its Forge-Mistress, or its director. I told them my fire was already spoken for." He lowered his head and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that spoke of shared history and a certain future. It was a kiss of quiet nights and challenging days, of arguments over geological strata and agreements on the shape of their life together. It was the warmth of a hearth, not the blaze of a cataclysm. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his, her pointed ears brushing against his temples. She looked from his face to the spire and back again. The human who had come to scratch the skin of her world had instead shown her its very soul, and in doing so had captured hers. The fire he had unleashed had not been one of destruction, but of creation, of a new volcano, a new future, and a new unbreakable love. And she knew, with a certainty that surpassed any science or faith, that it would burn steadily and brightly for all the years to come.